Greetings from Brother Stephen. I'm a student and witness of Yahashua Christ. To all the inhabitants of the earth, I present to you as a witness the gospel of the kingdom. In this lesson, titled Understanding the Beginnings, we are going to take all the information um, that we have learned from the last couple Bible studies that we did. A sheep in the midst of wolves, possessed with devils, explaining Eden. We're going to take all that information and apply it back to the book of Genesis to make sure that it all fits, all makes sense, and scripture is not contradicting scripture. So I want to begin this lesson off in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 22 through 23. It says, Yod He Vav He created me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting. This means he was set up in eternity before there was time. From, this word from comes from a Hebrew word that means before. So he's saying before the beginning. And the beginning is referring to the book of Genesis where it says in the beginning, and it comes from a Hebrew word, Radasheth. He says, or before the earth was. Again, if you go to Genesis chapter 1, verses 1, in the beginning, it says, Rasheth, God created the heavens and the earth. And I talk about this in the lesson titled, Jesus was God and with God in the beginning. So if you want to know more about how Rasheth and the true meaning of Rasheth, you have to go back and watch Jesus was God and with God in the beginning. Acts chapter 15, verse 18, it says, known unto God are all his works from the beginning of the world. 1 Peter 1, 19 through 20 says, but with the precious blood of Christ, as the lamb without blemish and without spot, who, this word who is talking about Yahashua, verily was foreordained before the foundations of the world, but was manifest in these last times for us. So, and then Titus verses 1 and 2, in hopes of eternal life, which God that cannot lie promised before the world began. So if you go back and you look at that Hebrew word Rasheth, if you translate this into its most earliest form of Hebrew, they're symbols that kind of spell out a sentence instead of a word. And you have like the Son of God destroyed, hands and arms, basically nailed to the cross. So that is the meaning of Rashet when you translate it back into a ancient Hebrew. And the scriptures here confirms that Acts 15:18, 1 Peter 1:19 through 20, Titus 1 through 4, that basically when God created everything, there was no accidents. Everything was well planned, well thought out, and it wasn't just by a mistake, that it was part of a much bigger plan. I'm back at Proverbs. It said, when there was no depths. In other words, he's talking about before Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2. And if you go to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2, it says, and the earth was without form. This means there was no inner core, and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Talking about the deep waters. So when there was no depths, it's talking about before Genesis 1 and 2. It says, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. He said, I was brought forth or created when there was no foundations abounding in the waters, Before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was created. While as yet he, referring to Yod He Vav He, had not made the earth. So these scriptures and Proverbs, this is not talking about the Messiah, Christ. This is talking about a different being because we know Yod He Vav He is Yahashua. So it's saying while as yet Yod He Vav He or Yahashua had not made the earth, nor the fields. The fields just are the continents, nor the highest parts of the dust of the world. And 1 second here. So if you go back again to John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, and again, I explain all of this, and Jesus was God and with God in the beginning, but this is just a quick review. John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, and verse 14, it says, in the beginning was the Word, as Yod He Vav He. And Yod He Vav He was with God, and Yod He Vav He was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things was made by Yod He Vav He. And without him was not anything made that was made. And the Word, talking about Yod He Vav He, was made flesh. Yahashua. So Yod He Vav He and Yahashua are the same person. It says, and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Back to Proverbs verse 27, it says, when he, talking about Yahashua, created the heavens. This word heavens here, it is talking about the Milky Way, the galaxy. This entity is saying, I was there. And this is talking about Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 through 8, the first day, light. And God said, let there be light. This is when he created the galaxy. And there was light. There was a galaxy. And God saw that the galaxy, that it was good. And God divided the galaxy from outer space. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. Now, actually, when you read Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 through 8, and you realize that the beginning is referring to a galaxy, it actually gives you a little information that we can apply to the rest of the universe. That when we see galaxies that are in outer space in telescopes, and here I have a couple different pictures of different galaxies. This first galaxy is this is a spiral galaxy. This is a pinwheel galaxy. This galaxy is this is a spiral galaxy also, and this galaxy is a ring galaxy. There is if you can Google it online, it's called the New General Catalog of nebula and clusters of stars, and you can look up all of the galaxies that they have discovered. But basically, every time we see a galaxy, it actually represents a beginning, when a species was created. And how do we know that? We know that because of Genesis. When he created our galaxy, what did he do? He put life in that galaxy. Each galaxy is a beginning. The earth is very young. We are not the only species in this universe. And one of the reasons that we know that is because we're reading right here in Proverbs that this is a species saying Yod He Vav He created me in the beginning of his way, before he created the Milky Way, the heavens and the earth that we know. I was set up from everlasting, eternity, before there was time, before the Rashet. So this entity is from another galaxy. If you go to Genesis 1 and 2, one of the things I want to point out here is that when um, God created the galaxy in the beginning, the water, the planet that we know of Earth was a water planet. When he created the galaxy, he created the water planet also. This is part of the Milky Way before the firmament was ever put into the middle of the waters. So when you say, and the earth was without form and void, um, in other words, there was no earth, no dry land, and darkness was upon the surface of the deep. When he created the galaxy, our Milky Way, that is when the waters, what we call I'll call it the planet of water, was also created. It says, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now, one of the things I want to do is explain exactly what this means, because we don't know this 1,000 times. But for now, I wanted to present a full understanding of what it means when it says, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And we talked about this in sheep in the midst of wolves. If you go to John chapter 6, verses 63, it says, it is the Spirit that quicken, which means springs to life. The flesh profit nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life. So when we read here, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, this is the same Spirit that gave life to all living creatures. And this Spirit comes from Yahashua. So when it says, and the Spirit of God, this is talking about the Son of God, Yahashua, moved upon the face of the waters. What do you mean Yahashua moved upon the face of the waters? Well, let's go apply Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 27. It says, Yahashua walks on water. It says, and straightway, Yod He Vav He, constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitude away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Yahashua went unto them walking on the sea. And when his disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. But Yahashua spake unto them, saying, be of good cheer. It is I. Be not afraid. So now you go back to Genesis 1 and 2, and it says, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the surface of the deep ocean, and the Son of God, this is Yahashua, in the beginning, he walked upon the surface of the waters. That is what that scripture means. Yahashua was there in the beginning, walking on the surface of the waters. You go to Proverbs, back at Proverbs chapter 8, verses 22 to 30. We have verse 27. It says, and when he set a compass, talking about this compass, it means circle, but what it is talking about is talking about the atmosphere upon the surface of the waters. This is talking about the second day. When you go to Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 to 8, it said, and God said, let there be a firmament, which is a molten core. A molten core has gases. So the atmosphere are the gases that comes from the molten core. So God said, let there be a firmament, a molten core, in the middle of the waters, and let it separate the oceans from the clouds. And God made the firmament. I have a study titled The Firmament that you can go to, get an in-depth understanding. Like I say, this is just a quick preview, tying everything together. So basically, in the beginning, we have a planet of water, and God creates a firmament. And he takes this firmament and its atmosphere, and he places it in the core of the ocean. And again, when you go to verse 7, and it separated the clouds which were under the firmament from the oceans which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament, talking about the gases that the molten core produced, he called it the atmosphere. Well, we call it the heavens, but this is what we know as the atmosphere or the sky. So basically what we have now, you have a planet of water. The planet of water have an atmosphere, and because of the atmosphere, it traps water vapors, which we call clouds, in the atmosphere. It says, and the evening and the morning were the second day. In Proverbs again, verse 28, it says, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains, this is talking about the foundation of the deep, when he placed the firmament in the ocean, when he gave the sea his decree. This is where we get our natural laws and our laws of gravity from. And I have a study on that called the third day, laws of nature. That the waters should not pass his commandment, when he appointed the foundations of the earth. This is talking about Genesis chapter 1, verses 9 through 13. He's talking about the third day, dry ground. It says, and God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place. The waters began to cool the molten core. It says, and let the dry firmament appear, and it was so. And God called the dry firmament earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. So we went from God created the galaxy. Within the galaxy was a ball of water. In this ball of water, he put a firmament. The firmament was cooled by the waters, and as the firmament expanded to the surface of the waters, we have dry land. Again, I explained this stuff in depth in the study, the firmament. So, and now we have verse 30. When I was by him, as one brought up with him, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him. So this is that entity that was created before the heavens and the earth was created. He's saying, then I was by him. He said, I was by Yahushua in the beginning. When he created the heavens and the earth, I was by Yahushua as one brought up with him. And I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him. If you go to Psalms 148 and 2, it say, praise you him, all his angels. Praise you him, all his host. So this scripture we're reading in Proverbs, it is talking about angels. That their galaxy, what they was created, they come from their own galaxy, and they was created before the heavens and the earth was created. If you go to Luke chapter 2, verses 13, it said, and suddenly there was an angel, a multitude of heavenly hosts, praising God and saying, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men. These are the entities that is rejoicing always before him. If you go back to the study, possessed devils, when Yahushua crossed the sea to go cast the demons out of the two men in the tombs, They knew exactly who Yahshua was. And this is why they knew exactly who Yahshua was. Because um, they then I was by him as one brought up with him. They knew exactly who Yahshua was. And I was daily his delight. And then again, if you go to Jude 1 verses 6, it says, and the angels which kept not their first estate. This means their beginning. They didn't keep their beginning, but left their own inhabitations. They left their planet. They left their galaxy. This is still Genesis chapter 2. This is the fourth day when he creates the sun, the moon, and the constellations. Now remember, when you go back to Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 through 8, when God said, and let there be light, the reason you know this is talking about a galaxy, because he did not create the sun and the moon and the stars on the first day. He did not create the sun and moon and the stars until the fourth day. So on that first day, when he said, let there be light, that was the galaxy. And God said, let there be light. Now, in this one, in this section of scripture, is talking about the sun, the moon, and the constellations in the atmosphere of the heaven. To divide the day from the night, or to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons. When they say for signs, this word signs, it means end signs. And it's a sign of Christ's coming and the end of the world. That is what this word signs mean when you read it in the book of Genesis. So he said, let it be for signs, end signs. I have a study on that called The Fourth Day, exposing Peter's zeitgeist, Joseph's zeitgeist, false teaching. And also, I have another study that is titled Sealing Up the Prophecies, that talks about these end signs. So let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. The signs is the constellations, to divide the light from the dark, talking about the sun and the moon. He said, and let them be for lights in the atmosphere of the sky, to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights. This is the sun and the moon. The great light, talking about the sun, which is the lake of fire, to rule the day. He made the stars also. That's the stars referring to the constellations for end signs. Here's just a little picture updated. Now we have the planet within the Milky Way. It has clouds, it has dry land, it has an atmosphere. He creates the constellations, the sun, and the moon. And God said, let the atmosphere of the sky to give light upon, and God said, let them be in the atmosphere of the heavens to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. Now we're at the fifth day, and God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creatures that have life, and birds that they may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moved, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. I have a study here titled The Fifth Day is when God created cherubims. The word cherubims Um, what we know them, a more accurate translation for today would just be a dragon, a huge bird, just like he created great whales, huge fish, whales that swim deep in the ocean. He also created huge birds that fly deep in the atmosphere, deep in outer space. And like I said, I go over that in detail with the fifth day God created cherubims. So if you go to Genesis chapter 1, verses 24 to 31, we're at the sixth day, animals on land. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures. These are animals after his kind, cattle, which is domesticated, and insects and reptiles and mammals of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the mammals of the earth after his kind, and the domesticated animals after their kind, and everything that creep or crawling, talking about insects and reptiles, upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Actually, the statement that we keep reading when saying it was good is very important that you remember that it was good. And God said, let us make Adam or Adam in our image. In other words, this means Adam looked identical to Christ. And when you say, what do you mean he looked identical to Christ? Because Christ was there in the beginning. He walked on the waters in the beginning. And that exact image that God was in the beginning, he said, let us make Adam, that he look identical after our likeness. This means Adam looked like God, he walked like God, he talked like God, he had the mannerisms, was identical to God. He was a clone of God. If you go to Genesis chapter 5, verse 3, it says, and Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness, after his image. This means Adam had a son that was in his spitting image. That's the term we will use today. He's the spitting image of his father. Seth was the spitting image of Adam. Adam was the spitting image of Yahashua. Spitting image, it means an exact double of another person or thing. But we're talking about people, so the exact double of another person. So Adam looked at identical to Christ, the Christ that walked on waters. The Christ, if we was able to see Christ when he was made flesh, when he was born from the womb of Mary, when he became an adult male, if you was looking at Christ, it would have been as if you was looking at Adam in the beginning. And for more information about Adam, again, I did a study called The Potter and the Clay, and also the 6-day facts about Adam and Eve. It says, and let him have dominion. In other words, Adam was created a king. He was created to rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing. This again talking about crawling insects and reptiles. And it was good that crawl upon the earth. And God created Adam in his own image. In the image of God created he Adam. Male and female created he them. A lot of people read this and they think that the female was created in God's image. She was not. God created Adam in his image. This next statement just said male and female created he them. It is not saying he created female in his image. This is why the female was not made from the dust of the ground like Adam was, but she was taken out of Adam. She was a clone of Adam, not a clone of Christ. So male and female, we're talking about king and queen, mom and dad. She was the mother of all living. Adam is the father of all living. He created them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful. This means have sexual intercourse and multiply, have children, and fill the earth and keep it under control. That's what it means, subdue it. He created Adam as a king, gave the king a queen, and their kingdom was the earth to keep under control. And have dominion. This means rule, reign as king over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that move upon the earth. Whatever Adam told, in other words, whatever Adam told animals to do, they did. The beginning, we can't look at today's time and try to, the only thing that we know about life and try to apply it to the beginning when God first created everything. The earth, everything back then was totally different. Not like it is today. Animals did not fear people. And whatever Adam told animals to do, they obeyed. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb, these are plants and flowers, bearing seeds, which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for food. And every mammal of the earth, and every bird of the air, and everything that crawl upon the earth wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for food. In other words, back then, when God first created the heavens and the earth, everybody was vegetarians. Nobody, nothing, no animals ate meat. They ate fruits and vegetables, plants and flowers. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. We're going to jump to Genesis chapter 2, verses 4 through 7, the creation of man. It says, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, God had made the earth and the heavens and every plant of the field. This word plant right here, when it says of every plant of the field, he's specifically referring to Eden before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field or every herb of Eden before it grew. Genesis chapter 2, verses 19 to 20. This is talking about Adam names the animals. It says, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him and help make for him. And out of the ground, this is talking about out of the Adamah. This word Adamah is talking about the red soil of Africa. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, God pottered every animal. So where did God create all animals? In Africa. It say every beast of the field. That field is referring to Eden. It was known when God first created the heavens and the earth, that territory was known as Eden. And every bird of the air, and brought them unto Adam. Who is Adam? Adam is an African. And you might be saying, why are you calling Adam an African? Because he was created from African soil. All living creatures was created from in Africa on African soil. So that would have made Adam an African. The name Africa only it comes from a Western use through the Romans. The word um, was used. The Romans basically called the territory of Africa. It was called the Africa Terra, which means the land of Africa. Now, that's the English version of Africa. It comes from a Greek word, like it's Afrik. You would spell that Aprike, and the meaning of Afriki means without cold. So that's where the term Africa. That's why they called it Africa, because it was known as a territory that did not get cold. Now, the Latin translation is Africa. That's Aprica, and it just means sunny. So that's all Africa mean. Africa just means a place without cold and sunny. And this is also why, if you go back to the study that I did on explaining Eden, Eden is referred to as a place of shade out of, in other words, out of Africa or out of the sun. So Adam was created in Africa. All animals was created in Africa. Back then, the territory was just called Eden in the beginning. But the term we will use today is Africa. Adam was an African. And again, to see what he will call them, and whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to the cattle, and to the birds, and to the birds of the air, and to every beast of Eden. But for Adam there was not found an helpmate for him. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, God, had not caused it to rain upon the earth. We just actually jumping back here to give me one second. Going back to Genesis chapter 2, and we are at verse 5 here. For Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground, which means to take care of the garden. But there went up a mist from the earth to water the whole face of the Garden of Eden. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh pottered. In other words, Adam, this word here should not be man. Again, you got to go back and watch that study. The potter and the clay. But it's in Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, God pottered. This is Adam, which is a red man, and African, out of the dust of the red, or you can say African soil. Another thing I just want to talk about briefly here is the false evolution is not a false teaching. There is a such thing as evolution because the scriptures teach evolution. All evolution is the gradual development of something, especially from a simple to a more complex form. But this is not the type of evolution that the scriptures teach. The scriptures do not teach that we come from monkeys unto man. This is actually blasphemy, because that means God is a monkey, because Adam was created in God's image after his likeness. God is not a monkey. Yahashua is not a monkey. That means it was a monkey that walked on the water. That means a monkey created the heavens and the earth. So this is a lie. This is not the type of evolution that the Bible teaches. The type of evolution that the Bible does teach, though, is this: the gradual development of something, especially a form that is simple to a more complex form. An embryo that develops into an adult human being is evolution. Not only is it evolution, it is scientifically sound and proven. This is what evolution is. When God told the animals to reproduce, when he told Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply, that is evolution. To be able to create children from a embryo, then this embryo becomes an adult human being, or even in animals, from an embryo into an adult animal. That is what evolution is. Genesis chapter 2, the planting of the garden. In Yod He Vav He, God planted a garden eastward in Eden. And again, Eden means paradise, a place of shade and nutrition out of the sun, out of Africa. If you go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 20, it says, the fifth day, when God created fish and birds, it says, and God said, let the waters. Now, so where was Christ at when he created all the animals and everything? Well, again, if you go back to Genesis verses 1 and 2, it talks about how, and God created great whales. God did not create great whales on dry land. When God created all animals, Adam, all the fish, all the birds, Christ himself was standing at the Nile, what we call in Egypt, the Nile Delta. This is where all life was created. In Africa, in what we call Egypt, at the Nile Delta. So when he created great whales, where was the great whales at? In the sea. He didn't create great whales on dry land. He didn't create fish on dry land. He was somewhere where there was land and water is where he created all life. So when you go back to Genesis chapter 8, go back to Genesis, and Yod He Vav He, God planted eastward. This means northeast Africa. So if he created all animals here, if Christ himself stood right here when he created everything, as soon as you go eastward, what is eastward from here? And I have a map here so you can look at it. It's a little bigger. Just eastward is Jerusalem. Where it is in Jerusalem? The city of David, the Garden of Eden. So he took the man after he created what it says in Yod He Vav He planted a garden eastward of northeast Africa in Eden, and there he put the man. He created the man here, and eastward from there is where he put the man. And again, we go over this in depth in the study explaining Eden. And there he put the man. Who was the man? The African, whom he had pottered, and out of the ground made Yod He Vav He, God, to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, and the tree of life also in the midst of the garden. Just to talk about the tree of life really briefly, again, if you go back to Matthew chapter 13, verse 34, it says, and all these things spake Yahashua unto them in the multitude in parables, and without a parable spake he not unto them, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundations of the world. So within parables are secrets that have been kept from the foundations of the world. Psalm 78 and 2 put it this way, I will open my mouth in parables, and I will utter mysteries of old. So within parables are mysteries of old. If you go to Matthew chapter 13, verse 44, when you get into the parable of the treasures and pearl, it says again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a treasure hid in a field. So the reason, if you ever ask why did they never eat of this tree of life? Because the tree of life was hidden. They did not know where it was. Just that simple. So again, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, it was hidden. And the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it was not hidden. And so again, we're back at verse 10. And again, I'm not going to go over this because I'll go over this in depth in explaining Eden, the garden of God. You have to go back to that study. But it says, and a river. This is talking, I have a picture here. This is talking about the Gihon Springs. Went out of Eden. This is the city of David. Eden and the city of David is the exact same location. So it says, and a river, talking about the Gihon Springs, went out of Eden to water the garden. And this is, this is the city of David, what we know as the city of David. And from hence, it was parted and became four heads. And we talked about these four heads, is they call it the name of the first, the Nile River. This is basically talking about Adam's kingdom, how it was divided into other kingdoms. Like I said, but again, you have to go back to explaining Eden, the kingdom of God, if you wanted an in-depth understanding about that. I'm going to go ahead to Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, the one on the seventh day. It says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all his works which God created and made. And again, I have a study on that. It's called the seventh day. Referring to the depletion of natural resources. In this study, I just let you know why it was important to keep the Sabbath day, and it was so that we gave the earth rest and did not destroy the earth. We did not keep the Sabbath day. We did not keep God's words. Therefore, the earth is dying, and it is already at a the earth is so sick it is impossible for man to do anything to cure the earth. We are in a moment in time that the earth is destroyed, it is done for, it is dying, and we're going to see that pass. Now we're going to get into Genesis. This is chapter 2, verses 21 to 25, the creation of woman. It says, in Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam. We just kind of know this today as simple putting a person under anesthesia and about to do surgery. And he slept. And he took one of his ribs, that surgery, and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh God had taken from the man made he a woman and brought her unto the man. Now, most people, when they read this, they have a hard time believing that woman came from man. In this little short description, I'm going to share with you why I think it's so ridiculous to not believe that woman came from man. The first thing is I want to talk about the male reproductive system. I myself am a father of 6, and basically what I have here from my male reproductive system that has come out of me, men and women. I have given birth to males and females. They come from my testicles. So to believe that life does not come out of men and women, it's absurd, because we know that life comes from a man's testicles. Now, it is easier for me to believe that God created a woman from a rib, because inside of a sperm cell is a single nucleus. But inside of a bone, DNA, inside of a bone, you have way more DNA than you have inside of a sperm cell. And it is easier to believe that a person can be created from a bone than to believe that human beings, people, come from a man's testicles. This is actually very hard to believe that human beings come from a man's testicles, but it is so. It's easier to believe that a human being can come from a man's rib than it is from a little small, single, microscopic sperm cell. So to believe that God did not create woman out of man's ribs, it is just foolishness. All life comes out of man, whether it is male or female. So again, um, from a man's testicles, you have a sperm cell. When a sperm cell is fertilized a woman's eggs, that sperm cell becomes an embryo. That embryo becomes a baby. That baby eventually grows up into an adult, male or female. But here, since we happen to be talking about Eve, it's a point to prove that out of man, that women come out of men. Males come out of men, and females come out of men. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." In other words, a clone. What is a clone? An organism or cell or group of organism or cell produced asexually. This means without having sexual intercourse, which they are genetically identical. Eve's genetics was identical to Adam's genetics. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Again, I did a study on this. It's called bone of my flesh. So in other words, when Adam and Eve was created, Adam was created in God's image. The woman was cloned. Adam was cloned from God. The woman was cloned from Adam. It means their genetic makeup, their chromosomes, DNA was perfect. It was unaffected by sickness, or by disease. They had no mutations whatsoever in their chromosomes. They were perfect, which means all of the children that they would have had before they fell into sin would have been unaffected children. They would have been born perfect. And when we say perfect, we're talking about genetically. They would have been genetically identical and they would have been perfect. No sickness, no disease, no birth defects, no. It say, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." Now it's talking. So we went from talking about producing Eve or Chava asexually. Now he's talking about, now that he produced them asexually, because it did not take sexual intercourse to produce Adam. It did not take sexual intercourse to produce Eve. That means they are clones. They are produced asexually. Now we get into verse 24. He's telling them to produce sexually, to clone sexually. And they were birthed naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. I did a study on this. It's called Be Fruitful and Multiply. So if you wanted to get more insight on verses 24, go to the study I did on Be Fruitful and Multiply. So now we get to Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, the serpent's deception. It says, "Now the serpent And like I said, we talked about this in several of the studies, but if you go back to the most recent study, it is possessed with devils. That the serpent was a dragon, but it was a dragon that was under the control of a fallen angel. And these angels was created before the earth was. So this is why when they say, and the serpent was more intelligent than any beast. This means any mammal, any animal, including man, because he existed long before man. He watched and witnessed the creation of our beginning, which Yod He Vav He God had made. So this is why it says the serpent was more intelligent, because they was created long before the earth was created. And the serpent, again, all it was a dragon. This might seem hard to believe, but if you go over the scriptures and read, it was a dragon who somehow became possessed by a fallen angel. It says, and he said unto the woman, yes, have God said, ye shall not eat of the tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, ye may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, sorry, give me a second here. God hath said, ye shall not eat of it. I'm going to pay close attention to what it says here. Neither shall you touch it, at least you die. So what is this talking about? It's talking about die from what? From sickness and disease. And we go over this in sheep in the midst of wolves. And the serpent said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die. What was he saying? He was trying to tell the woman, ye shall not immediately die. For God do know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing or experiencing good and evil. And when the woman saw the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and that the tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and give also unto her husband, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were open. Now I talked about this in another study. We know that Adam and Eve natural eyes was already open, and that this eyes is not talking about their natural eyes. It says, and they knew that they were naked. What does it mean that they knew that they were naked? They were ashamed. Because when you go back to Genesis chapter 2, it says they were naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. So they knew that they were naked. They were ashamed. They felt guilty of their actions. They knew they just did something God told them not to do. They became aware of sin. And because they ate, they touched and ate of the forbidden tree that God told them not to eat from, they ate sickness and disease. They immediately became affected, both of them. So now when we go back to this little diagram here, I'm using this so you can understand. Before, they was unaffected. All of their chromosomes, gold, unaffected. Now they became carriers, which means one of their chromosomes became affected, and they became carriers of sickness and disease. The scriptures say, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. So now we're going to jump to Genesis chapter 3, verses 14. And it says, and Yod He Vav He, God said unto the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. And it said, upon your belly shall you go. Talking about a worm, a parasite, an organism that lives in or on another organism. and benefit by deriving nutrition at the host's expense. Look what he says to the serpent, and dust. Why did he say dust? He's talking about flesh. Shall you eat all the days of your life? They got stuck. Satan and his fallen angels were stuck. They became trapped as parasites, microscopic parasites. That's why I have these pictures here. I'm going to go back up here real quick. If you zoom, these are actual pictures of parasites. When you zoom in up close, when you look at them, they are not of this earth. How do you know? When God was creating everything in the beginning, he said, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. Parasites are not, and it was good. Parasites are not from this earth. When you look at them up close, it's obvious that you are looking at demons. They are just microscopic. Particularly this demon here, because when you read the book of Revelation, it talks about the serpent had how many crowns on his head? 7 crowns upon his head. So these are what the parasites look like underneath a microscope. If you're just looking at them, this is just a different view from a microscope. It is not that close, but this is what Satan became. Satan and his fallen angels are parasites. They multiply and produce as parasites. Go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 21. The expulsion of paradise. It says, and Adam said unto his and Adam also and to his wife did Yod-Heh-Vaveh God make coats of skin and clothe them. And Yod-Heh-Vaveh God said, behold, the man has become as one of us, to know, in other words, have to experience, deal with good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore, Yod-Heh-Vaveh God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden. This is also, again, the city of David, to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden a cherubim or a dragon. When it says, and a flaming sword, when it's a flaming sword, all it's describing is a weapon. In other words, what he put there was a fire-breathing dragon, which turned every way to keep or to guard the way of the tree of life. So now we at Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. This is Cain and Abel. It says, and Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have got a man, Yod-Heh-Vaveh. I have got a man from Yod-Heh-Vaveh. And she again bare his brother, in other words, twins, Abel. And Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. Now again, it's important to understand genetics and chromosome. All children get their genetic codes from their parents. They get a chromosome from the dad, and they get a chromosome from the mom. So right now we're talking about, remember, before they fell into sin, they was unaffected, which means all of their kids would have been unaffected. But now, since Adam and Eve have sinned and ate of sickness and disease, they are carriers, which means one of their chromosomes are affected. So we'll start here. If you take a chromosome from the mom, you get a gold chromosome, an unaffected chromosome, and then one from the dad, you get 2 unaffected chromosomes. That means this child would be an unaffected child. If you take an affected chromosome from the mom and then unaffected from the dad, you have a child that is just like the mother and father, which means they are carriers. They can pass the gene on. It's the same thing. If you take a unaffected chromosome from the dad and an affected chromosome from the mom, that child is the same way. He's a carrier of the affected gene. And now, out of the worst, is when you take the parents, the child inherit from the mother and the father the affected chromosome. That child that inherits from the mother and the father the affected chromosome, he don't become just a carrier of the gene, he become literally affected by the gene. He's affected, sick, diseased. It's just like when you're breeding animals. If you know you do not breed a male and a female animal that has the same genetic defect, because the defect is going to be in the puppies. So what do we have here? Because Adam and Eve fell into sin and had children, you have Cain, which inherited both of the affected genes from his parents, and you had Abel, who was unaffected because he inherited the unaffected genes from his mother and his father. So let's go read a little bit about Cain. It's in Genesis chapter 3, verses 8 through 16. Cain murders Abel. And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and murdered him. What does this mean? Cain was a psychopath. What is a psychopath? A person with a personality disorder, manifesting itself in extreme antisocial attitudes and behavior and a lack of consciousness caused by gene mutations from parasitic disease. In other words, it is a known fact today that psychopaths has a mutated gene. And the mutated gene is what we would call a duplication in the gene. Some people say it's a duplication as extra X chromosome. They vary on the mutation, but one thing that they all agree with, that it is a duplication of a chromosome, which means it is a mutation in his chromosome. And all mutations is caused by parasitic diseases. So what that means, he's affected, and now he's affected and he's carrying a parasite. He's carrying these demons that affect or mutated his chromosomes. It says, and Yod-Heh-Vav said unto Cain, where is Abel your brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? Psychopath, unmerciful, lack of consciousness, a mutation in his chromosome because he was affected. If you go to verse 6, we jump into verse 16. It says, and Cain went out of the presence of Yod-Heh-Vav. This means he left out of Eden. Why? He said, because least any man should find me and kill me. So what did he do? He left he left out of Eden. It says, and he dwelt in a land of Nod, a land of Lot. Nod means wandering, on the east of Eden. And what we know that today as Iran. He left out of Eden, the territories of Eden, and he went into the land somewhere either in Iran or past Iran. He went to the east. Now we go to Genesis chapter 4, verses 17 to 24. It talks about the descendants of Cain. It says, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. and he built a city and called it the name of that city after the name of his son. So what do we now problem we have here? Now we have Cain. Cain could have only got his wife from one other source, and that was from Adam and Eve, whose children was unaffected. So this is Cain, this is his wife. But what happened with all of Cain's offspring? They all become carriers. Every last child he have become a carrier, and every last child he has inherit his mutated gene. And what mutated gene? A duplication in the chromosome. They are unconscious. They don't have a conscience like normal people anymore. So these are the descendants of Cain. Their mutations are caused by what? Parasitic disease, parasites. And it says, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare him a son, and called his name Seth. For God said, she hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. In other words, when this child was born, it inherited both of the unaffected chromosomes from Adam and Eve. He was an unaffected child. And to Seth, to whom also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of Yod He Vav He. If you go to Genesis chapter 5, verses 3 through 5, it says, and Adam lived 130 years. When it's talking about Adam lived 130 years, this is talking about after he ate of the forbidden tree. That is when sickness and disease entered into the world, and that is when time began for Adam and Eve, because now he has to die. So before he ate of that, there was no time. If you go to Genesis chapter 2, verses 15 to 17, again, it's talking about the forbidden fruit. And Yod He Vav He, God took man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it. And Yod He Vav He, God commanded the man, saying, of the tree of the garden you may freely eat. But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it. For in the day that you eat thereof, you shall surely die. You got to remember, the Lord seeth not as man seeth. When God saying ye shall surely die, God wasn't talking about you shall die immediately. And that talking about man's standard of immediately. In God's eye, it's still immediately, even if it's 1,000 years. But he's saying when you shall surely die, he was talking about from sickness and disease. Now, aging is among the greatest known risk factors for most human diseases. And of the roughly 150,000 people who die each day across the globe, about 2/3 die from age-related causes. Aging is a disease. It is the one disease that cannot be cured whatsoever until Christ returns and grants us eternal life. Again, Adam and Eve, before they fell into sin, did not age. So we told you shall surely die. We told Adam, you shall surely age. Aging is a disease. Adam and Eve did not age at all, nor their children, before they fell into sin. Even once Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit, they began to what? They became carriers and began to age immediately. And they passed those traits on to their children. All of their children before the flood, you got to remember, at this point they were still unaffected. They still did not age. Most people try to look back in time and say there was lost civilization that existed on the face of the earth before me. This who was talking about. Those are Adam and Eve kids that they had before Cain and Abel. If you go to Romans chapter 5, verses 15, just something I wanted to explain real quick. It says, nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression. So even Seth's seed, who is the figure of him that was to come. So even though Adam and Eve had children that inherited their healthy chromosome, it is just written in scripture that nevertheless death reigned from Adam to Moses, even unto them that had not sinned after the similitude, who was a figure of him to come. So although they was unaffected, they still have to die because of sin. If you go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, it says, and when the woman saw the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eye, and the tree to desire to make one wise, she took the fruit thereof and did eat, and give also unto her husband, and he did eat. Again, you go back to the study, you go the 6th day, facts about Adam and Eve. And in Genesis 2 and 17, but for in those days that ye eat thereof, ye shall surely die from sickness and disease and aging. So again, when you go back to Genesis chapter 5, verses 3 to 5, and Adam lived, which means aged, 130 years. Again, this was from the day that he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and begat a son in his likeness after his image, and called his name Seth. In other words, again, Seth, he was unaffected like Adam was the day he was created. His genes was not mutated. He inherited the unaffected gene from Adam and Eve. It says in the days of Adam, after he had begotten Seth, were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. So we have Seth here, unaffected, and these represents his other sons and daughters. His other sons and daughters would have been carriers, affected. The daughter would have been, you could have daughter that was unaffected, carriers, and affected. So these represents the children of Adam after the fall. And we go to verse 5, and all the days of Adam lived was 930 years, and he died. I have here, and he surely died, just like God told him he was. So what I have here is just a chart. It's just kind of like a quick review. Here we have Adam and Eve. And these represents the offspring of Adam and Eve, and so you can kind of see this genetically. They had children before the flood, which was unaffected. So we have here the offspring before the fall, and I have this here because this is what we know as the Nephilim. And it's a study. You can go watch the study called the Nephilim to understand exactly whom the Nephilim are. And these are Adam and Eve children before the fall. Now we have Cain. Abel is not in here because Abel was killed by Cain, but we have Cain, who we know is affected and possessed with parasites or demons, because he has no conscience, or what we will call today a psychopath. A mutation in his gene. And it says in the scriptures, it says he took a wife. His wife could have only came from one place, and that was the offspring before the fall. So this represents Cain and his wife. This represents Seth and his wife. If you go to Genesis verse 5 to 6, it says Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. Now I want you to notice something here. It say he lived 105 years before he even had a child. Why? That is indication in the scriptures that his wife did not come from the offspring before the fall, but what his wife came from those offspring after Seth. And most likely, when you read the scriptures, he probably took a wife who was also unaffected like he was. So here we have the offspring of Cain, um, which the main thing to remember just about his offspring is that their chromosomes was mutated. And when you get to Seth, their chromosomes was not mutated. When you get to Genesis chapter 6, verses 9 through 10, it says these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which means all of them would have been unaffected. Anytime you're dealing with a person that's saying there's perfect, it is not just talking about perfect in behavior. They are perfect in behavior because they are genetically perfect. They don't have mutations in their chromosomes. It is the mutations in the chromosomes that cause people to sin and crave sin, to be evil, to be murderers, to be sadistic. And this is caused by parasites that mutate the gene. So again, Seth and his descendants, genes would have been unmutated. Cain and his descendants, genes are mutated. Whether it's a duplication in the gene, something else inserted into the gene, or something deleted out of the gene. When you have deletions out of the gene, this is when you see serious birth defects, even deformities. In this little short um, here, I just want to explain to you so you can visually understand what it means when I'm talking about a deletion in the gene or mutation or an insertion. Basically, this is the DNA base before how it should normally look. So as you can see, we have cat, 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 cat. When you have a deletion in the chromosome, as you can see here, that CAT, the A is taken out. This is a deletion of a single nucleotide. So it's taken out. It's a deletion. When you have a deletion, it causes incorrect amino acid sequence, which may produce a malfunctioning protein. And when you have an insertion, it's kind of the opposite. You have the CAT, but now you have an A. This is an insertion, and it has the same effects as a deletion. And as you can see here, it throws off the amino acid. Now we're going to keep going here. We are at Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Now we have the wickedness of men. It says, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God. This is referring to the children of Israel, or the descendants of Seth. Again, if you go back to Genesis verses 3 through 15, after the fall, he says this is when he cursed Satan and turns him into, he's stuck as a parasite. He says, and I will put enmity between you and the woman. The woman was not talking about Eve. The woman was talking about the church. And between your offspring, and what do he mean, your offspring? People like Cain with genetic defects, and her offspring. This is talking about Israel, people that are not genetically defective. So I'll put enmity between the genetically mutated and Israel, who's not genetically mutated. It says, so when it say, then the sons of God saw the daughters of men. Who was the daughters of men? The genetically mutated. And where did the genetically mutated come from? Their father is Cain. So these are the daughters of Cain. It says that they were fair, they were still beautiful on the outside. But that's why the scriptures teach the Lord see not as man see. They say, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but God looketh on what? The DNA. Why? Because you can be beautiful on the outside, but genetically mutated, carry sicknesses, diseases, and have parasites. It says, and they took them wives, all of which they chose. So who are we talking about here? We're talking about Japheth, Shem, and Ham. We're talking about the sons of Noah. If there was other descendants of Noah who also, it could have possibly took wives from the daughters of men, but right here we focus on Japheth, Shem, and Ham. So Japheth, when you read about Japheth, it is evident that Japheth took a daughter of Cain. And I have a study here. You go back to the study. It's called Three Nations Divided in the Earth. Shem took a daughter of one of his Adam's descendants, a sister, or if it wasn't a sister, you could say a cousin or something like that, a niece. He lived long enough to have took a if it was not a sister, he lived long enough to took a wife that could have been like a niece or something like that of his descendants. But it is obviously when you read the scriptures that his wife was not mutated, did not have, wasn't worried about sickness, disease, or mutations in the chromosomes. And all you have to do is go read the Holy Seed Mingle. It just talks about why it was so important in Scripture that they did not marry outside of their family, that they kept everything within the family. It was tried to not so sickness and disease cannot get into their bloodlines. And then when you get to Ham, I did this study again called the Nephilim, that Ham's wife had to come from the descendants of the Nephilim, which was Adam and Eve descendants before the fall. So again, Japheth married one of the descendants of Cain. Shem married one of the descendants of Adam and Eve that was born after him, but obviously was not affected either. Then you have Ham. Again, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, neither of them was affected because they're all descendants of Seth. And his wife had to come from when you just read through the scriptures, and we'll go over some briefly, had to come from the descendants of Adam and Eve before the fall. So in Yod He Vav He said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. Eventually, no one will live past 120 years. And this is evident. This is a proven fact today that people just don't live past 120 years now. Now we're going to pay close attention to the scriptures. It says, there were giants. This word giants come from the Hebrew word Nephilim. In the earth in those days. In those days means before the flood. Why is they bringing up the Nephilim? To let you know that they was married the Nephilim. It says, and also after, talking about after the flood, there was Nephilim. How did the Nephilim get on the other side of the flood if God killed everybody? Through Ham's wife and his offspring. Then it says, when the sons of God, here we have the sons of God, came in unto the daughters of men. It says, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men. The same became even big, kind of like the Nephilim. And you say, well, this don't make sense. It does make sense. When you think about it, who was Cain's wife? Cain's wife was also a Nephilim. So Cain descendants had Nephilim DNA in their blood also. This is why, and the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. It didn't say they became Nephilim. It just said they became in a way like the Nephilim. Because they had Nephilim, Cain's wife had Nephilim DNA also. So now we have verse 5, and it's important to remember that this is about 1,100 years after Adam's sin. So it only took about 1,000 years before the earth became completely contaminated with sickness and disease. It says, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. What does that mean? Genetically mutated. They became evil, like Cain. They started doing things that was unconscionable. They didn't have a conscience anymore. Psychopaths, violent. It said, and it repented Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. What does it mean when it says God repented? Anytime you're reading in scripture where it says God repented that he made man, is because he's upset and he's about to destroy man. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and mammal and creeping thing, reptiles and insects and birds of the air. In other words, almost every living thing became infected and violent, killing and preying on each other. It did not just the sickness and disease just does not live in animals. Live in people. It can be in animals. We read about that in being possessed with devils when the demons asked to be cast into the pigs. So the host does not have to be a human host. It could be it can be a bird. We've read about that because the cherubim that tempted Eve. It can be of any species. Now, most people say, why would God, when we go back to the flood, people will go, God seemed really cruel for killing everybody. But now when we look at it in the right context, that the earth was full of disease, sicknesses, viruses, and people had parasites, now you understand why God flooded the world. Because everybody was sick and diseased. He was doing it to preserve life. Just a scripture I want to read really quick. If you go back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 17 through 18, it says, and unto Adam he said, because you have hearkened unto the voice of your wife.
You're going to want to sign in, sir? Because if someone signs in now, they'll kick you out.
I'll sign in a second.
Okay.
Again, we have Genesis chapter 3, verse 17. It says, and unto Adam he said, because you have hearkened unto the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, saying, ye shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground. This is talking about Eden, the entire fertile crescent, how God blessed it to be like a place of shade and nutrition, he cursed the ground. He took that away. He said when it was for Adam's sake. He said, in his sorrow shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. Thorns and thistles shall bring forth to you, and ye shall eat the herb. In other words, plant, leaves, and flowers. No fruit grew during this from the time Adam sinned until the time after the flood. So one of the reasons why people could have been being so violent could have possibly even been promoted kind of by starvation because the ground was cursed. The blessings that God bestowed upon man, that peace covenant that he had, that peace covenant was done away with. If you go to Genesis chapter 2, verses 10 through 14, is when it talks about, and a river went out of Eden, and from hence it was departed and became four heads. All the blessings flowed from Eden. When the Garden of Eden got sick, the rest of Eden became sick. When I say when he cursed the ground in Eden, all the rest of the ground became cursed. And again, if you go to Ezekiel chapter 34, 25 through 31, this is talking about a covenant of peace. And I'll put this in here just so you can understand the covenant of peace that existed in the days of Adam before he fell into sin. It says, and I will make with them a covenant of peace. This is the type of covenant that Adam and Eve had before they fell into sin. And I will cause evil beasts, and I will cause the evil beasts to cease out of the land, and they shall dwell safely in the wilderness and sleep in the woods. And I will make them and their places round about my hill a blessing, and I will cause the showers to come down in his season. There shall be in his season there shall be showers of blessings, and the tree of the field which yield her fruit, and the earth shall yield her increase, and they shall be safe in their land, and shall know that I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, when I have broken the bands of their yoke and delivered them from out of the hands those that serve themselves of them. And they shall no more be a prey to the heathen, neither shall the beasts of the land devour them. But they shall dwell safely, and none shall make them afraid. And I will rise up from them plant of renown, and they shall be no more consumed with hunger in the land, neither bear the shame of the heathen any more. Thus shall they know that I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, their God. And I am with them, and that they, even the house of Israel, are my people, said Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, God. And you may flock the flock of my pastures are men, and I am your God, said Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, God. So in other words, I just have this in there so you can understand basically and have an idea of what a covenant of peace with God means, and the covenant of peace that existed in Eden before the fall. But we're back here where it says, and it repented. Where am I at here? So now we're back here where it said, and it repented that I have made them. And I'm sorry I'm at the library, so give me a second here. I need to go log back into this computer so I don't have to worry about nobody kicking me out. So just give me a minute and I'll return. All right, so we're at Genesis. I'm going to jump to Genesis chapter 6, verses 13 through 22. And it's talking about when Noah builds the ark. It says, and God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me. for the earth is filled with violence through them. In other words, like I said, psychopathic people with mutations in the genetic code caused by parasitic diseases. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make you an ark. Now, in the scriptures, they have the fancy word ark here to make the ark sound like it was something really fancy, but all ark means is a big, strong box of gopher wood, rooms, to my holding areas shall you make in the ark, and shall cover it within and without pitch. Just in this word pitch just means tar. So the inside and the outside was covered with tar, obviously, so there it won't sink. Now, most people read this and they kind of think it is impossible for a man to build a ship this size. Well, the ark was only 500 feet. And I have a picture here of other boats, man-made boats. For instance, the Titanic is like twice the size of Noah's Ark, and you can almost fit about 4 of Noah's Arks into Queen Mary II. So to think it is impossible for people back then to build a boat the size of the ark is once again one of those things that is just completely absurd. And then another thing that I want to talk about really quick while I was on Noah's Ark, because people go, well, they couldn't have, even been smart enough to build an ark like that during those days. Well, I want to share these scriptures with you. If you go to Exodus verses 28 and 3 and 36 and 1, this is what it says. It says, and ye shall speak unto all that are wise hearted, whom I have, this is God talking, whom I have filled with the spirit of wisdom, that they may make Aaron's garments to consecrate him, that he may minister unto me in the priest office. In other words, what they're leaving out is that people can be filled with the Spirit of God and his wisdom, that God can put this wisdom in people so his will can come to pass. Again, in Exodus 36 and 1. Then worked Bezalel and Ahalabah, and every wise-hearted man in whom Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh put wisdom and understanding to know how to work all manner of work for the service of the sanctuary according to all that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had commanded. So when people talk about people back then couldn't have been smart enough to do this or do that, when God put his spirit in anybody, they can do anything that God programmed them to do. So I just wanted to say that we're going to jump to Genesis chapter 7 when it's talking about entering the ark. It says, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said unto Noah. Now it's important to understand that Noah is an African in Africa. And how do we know that he's an African in Africa? Because for one, all the animals was created in Africa. If he's going to build a ship to save the animals, he can only be in one place, and that is in Africa. And remember, Eden extended into the continent of Africa. So now he said, come you and all your house into the ark. For you have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean, this means every pure, unaffected, unsick animal, ye shall take to you by sevens. Not by 2, by sevens, male and female. So this is about 14. And of beasts that are not clean, this means affected or sick, impure, by 2, the male and his female. Of the birds also of the air by sevens, male and female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. Now, most people say this is impossible. What I have here is just a description, again, just to prove for people to be saying that this is impossible, just how absurd it sounds. First of all, it is obvious that all this he's talking about here is a zoo. in this first image I have here, this is a place called Toronto Zoo. It is 710 acres, and they have about 491 species of animals. Now, if man can do this, God can do this. This is Berlin Zoologic Garden. This they have this. I believe their zoo is about 80 to 85 acres, and they have about 1,500 species of animals. So when we read about Noah and the ark, the misconception is when people read about it is that they don't realize that the zoo existed long before the ark was being prepared. Animals would have been coming to Eden for shade, for nutrition, and to be taken care of by people from the day they were created, since the Eden. Remember, animals back then was not like the animals today. They did not fear people. And then when you read about it, there's no way that Noah and his 3 sons alone would have been taking care of all of these animals, nor built a ship by themselves. That is a carnal interpretation of the scriptures. What it was a zoo, well, a place that today we would call a zoo, where people took care of the animals, and not just one person, many people, thousands. Just like it takes thousands of employees to run a zoo, it would have took thousands of people to take care of all of these animals, and it would have took thousands of people to help build the ark, not just Noah and his 3 sons. This was a project that Noah was probably just the head, the boss, ran everything. But if man can do it, God can do it. So just another little point that I wanted to prove. It said, for yet 7 days I will cause it to rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made I will destroy from the face of the earth. And Noah did according unto all that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh commanded him. Now, once again, people might say, well, God seems cruel. If there were still people taking care of the animals, people who still helped build the ark, it seems cruel of God to have killed all those people, drown all those people, drown all the rest of those animals, drown all those kids. But it's not that God is cruel. Again, when you go back to Isaiah chapter 5, the song of the vineyard, it says, now I will sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard, talking about the Garden of Eden. My well-beloved have a vineyard in a very fruitful hill, and he fenced it. One of the things I just want to talk about here, and I'll get right back to the song of the vineyard. When you go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 21, when it talks about when Adam and Eve was expelled from the garden, it say he drove out the man and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden a cherubim. It means the garden was fenced with a wall. One way in, one way out. Set in a flaming sword, which turned every way to guard the way of the tree of life. So again, he said, I have a very fruitful hill, and he fenced it. Here in Genesis is evidence that even in Adam Day there was a wall. And then when you go to Daniel chapter 9 verses 24 through 27, this is kind of talking about the end times. It say 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your holy city, to finish up the transgression, and to make an end of sin, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and seal up the vision and the prophecy, and anoint the most holy. Gather this in a study, sealing up the vision and the prophecy. Verse 25, now therefore, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem, this will be the daily work when Israel returns back into Jerusalem, unto the Messiah, the prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That the street shall be rebuilt again, and the wall even in troublous times. In other words, it's talking about during the great tribulation. It says the street and the wall will be rebuilt. It says nothing about another temple. Because why? Because at this time we understand that temples are not made with man hands, but temples are the people. So we will have the street and the fence, and the temple will be God's chosen people, not a brick or stone building in the city of David. But just wanted to get that off my chest, but we'll keep going. We'll talk about that in a later study. It says, and he gathered all the stones thereof and planted it with most excellent vines, and built a tower in the midst thereof, and also made a winepress therein, and he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. It says, and now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem, this is even for the people of the world, judge, I pray you, between me and the Garden of Eden. What have I been done more to Eden that I have not done? So in other words, even so, when God, the reason God flooded the world, we just using this parable of on the vineyard. God seemed so cruel for flooding the world. What more could He have done? He gave man the planet. He gave them life. He gave them paradise. He gave them rain from heaven, fruit from trees. What more could He have done? It's man's fault for disobeying God. So I pray you between me and my vineyard. Talking about the Eden. What could I have been done more to Eden that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth self-fruiting grapes, it brought forth wild grapes, violence, psychopaths, evil thoughts, murderers. And now go to, I tell you what I will do to Eden. I will take away the fence. He go take away the wall thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the tower thereof, and it shall be trodden down, and I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned. Why? The peace covenant is over. Nor digged, fertilized, or toiled, but there shall come up prickly shrubs and thorns. Again, when you go back to Genesis chapter 3, 17 and 18, look what he tells Adam. And unto Adam he said, because you have hearkened unto the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, saying, ye shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In sorrow shall you eat of it all the days of your life. That means the 1,000 years that he lived his life. Thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to you. And ye shall eat the herb of the field. It says, I will command the clouds that it should not rain upon it. For the vineyard of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh of hosts is the house of Israel. And the men of Judea his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, talking about righteous judgment, but behold, oppression, unrighteous judgment. For righteousness, but behold, a cry. What do you mean, behold a cry? Violence, people crying out because they're being mistreated. So now we're going to jump to Genesis 8, 1 through 5. The ark rests on Ariat. Um, and God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. Another thing I want to mention about the ark, that majority of the animals that probably was taken onto the ark was newborn animals. So people say, oh, how can an ark that big fit such a big animal? One of the things they're not considering is they all were probably newborn animals, not adult animals. They probably took the what we call the pick of the litter and left the grown animals. They probably took young animals, which would make sense. But I will keep going. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters ceased. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, meaning it stopped raining, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated, and the ark rested on the seventh month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters um, deceased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month of the first day of the month, where the tops of the mountains seen. So one of the things I just want to point out here, most people place the ark, Noah's ark, and they be looking for him, and I believe in this location here, because it's called Mount Ararat. But when you read the scriptures, when you go to Genesis chapter 11, verses 9, when it talks about the Tower of Babel, it says, and the whole earth was one language, and that language is Hebrew, and of one speech. Mean, when they say one speech, it's talking about the same accent. In other words, it was one race of people, and that one race of people was Africans. White in the beginning, before the flood, white people did not exist, and here after the flood, white people did not exist yet on the face of the earth. And that's why the scriptures is here. One language, one speech. This was one race of people. And it came to pass as they journeyed, and this is the point I want to say, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, which means they came west from the land of Nod, that they found a plain. So while most people putting the ark here somewhere in this area, according to scriptures, they came from this direction. And they came back into the Fertile Crescent, back into what was known as Eden. They found the plain there in the land of Shinar. Shinar just means a country of two rivers. That's Euphrates and Tigris, and they dwelt there. So where do they dwell? They end up going back to Eden, the kingdom. Now, we had Genesis chapter 10, verse 6 through 20. I'm not going to read all of this. We just want to talk about the families that came from the Noah's sons after the flood. So these are the Hamites. It's important to understand that the Hamites, they are Africans, because Noah, Japheth, Shem, Ham, they was all Africans. They come from Africa. So you have Africans during the flood. They end up somewhere in the land of Nod, the land of wandering, but they come back to the garden of, they come back to Eden. But these are the Hamites. It says, and the sons of Ham, this is Cush. Cush just means black. This is talking about Ethiopians. And Mazrim, these are Egyptians. And Put, these are Libyans. And Canaanites. These are all African tribes, black Africans. So even when people try to pass off Egyptians as being white, but not Ethiopians white, sound absurd. These are all Africans. Egyptians are Africans. Ethiopians are Africans. Canaanites, these are all Africans. But one of the things I want to get down to, just to make a point, I want to go down here to the 9th verse, where it talks about And well, the 8th verse, and Cush begat Nimrod. Nimrod was an African. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. In other words, Babylon. These were Africans. And so, in other words, the study that I did when we talked about the it's important I just wanted to point out that Nebuchadnezzar was an African. A lot of these images that we see of Nebuchadnezzar look like a white man. Again, that is just whitewash deception. These wasn't the first people after Adam lost the kingdom. The kingdom was given over to Africans. Nimrod, Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, these was all Africans. And they did not just control Babylon, they controlled the entire Eden at that time. That was from Africa, the Nile, all the way over to the Euphrates and Tigris. These was Africans. And then again, when you get down to verse, let's see here, 13, and Mazrim, which is the Egyptians, begat Ludum and Anamin. I'm not going to try to pronounce all these names, but the main thing I want you to just notice here, and I have a study called the Nephilim. You just have to go back and watch it. If you notice, all of these end in IM, Nephilim ends in IM. These are because they had the giant genetic trait in their blood, and these were the giants came from. So even when you read about the Philistines, you have these were Africans. These was black people, not Caucasians. So they were all from African descent. Now we're back at verse 3. It says, and they said one to another, go, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and asphalt hath they for mortar, and they said, go to, let us build us a city and a pyramid whose top may reach the heavens, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh came down to see the city, and the pyramid which the children of men built. So who is the children of men? We're talking about Japheth, this is the older brother. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And they began to do this, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh scattered them abroad from hence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. So who left off to build the city? Japheth left off to build the city. Japheth left off to build the city. Japheth and his descendants left the Fertile Crescent. They left Eden. Therefore is the name of it is called Babel. The word Babel it still comes from the English word babble, or like we say, you babbling. It just means to utter something repeatedly and incoherently. In other words, they just didn't understand each other. Because Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh did there confound the language of all the earth, and from hence did Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Now, once again, people say, why would God scatter them? And they would seem like they was doing something good. They was together as one, seemed like they was doing something good. First of all, you got to go back to Samuel 16:6. For Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh see, not as man see. For man look on the outward appearance, but Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh look on the DNA. He's looking at the children of men, the daughters of men, Japheth the descendants. Why? Because they come from Cain. They was genetically mutated. These are the original children of Satan. When you go back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, it says, and I will put enmity between you and the woman. This line represents that enmity between Cain and Seth. Cain, these will be the children of Satan that the Antichrist come through. Seth, the Messiah, the real Messiah will come through. He said, and between your offspring, Cain's offspring, and the church offspring, Israel, which the firstborn of Israel is Seth. So he's going to put enmity between it. So the reason he confounded and scattered their language, to put enmity between thee and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. So he confounded the language, and Japheth left off from building the tower. And we're going to figure out where Japheth went. So again, this is just the Fertile Crescent, or what we call Eden. And at the time, everybody was here when God confounded their language. Japheth's descendants left. But now I want to go to Genesis chapter 10, verses 21 through 31. And this is talking about the Shem descendants. It says, unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber. These are Hebrews. So all the children of the Hebrews, the father of all the children of Hebrews. So this is basically talking about, this is where we get the word Hebrews from. It's from Eber. It says, the brother of Japheth the elder, even to him were children born. The children of Shem, Elam, and Azur. Actually, I'm going to skip all these names just so I can get to the point. It says, and Eber was born two sons. And Eber was born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. So when they say in his days was the earth divided, let me highlight this really quick so I can make this make some sense. This is when God came down and confounded the language. When it says, and Eber were born two sons, the name who was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. So this is when in his days when God came down and confounded the language. And in other words, into one nation, they all had the same, spoke the same language and the same speech. When they say divided the earth, it's somehow into three nations. And that again, go back to the study I did, three nations divided in the earth. It says, and his brother was Jacton, and Jacton begat. No, I'm sorry, I'm not going to read through all these. I just want to get to the point. Here. And their dwelling was from Messiah, as you goeth unto Sephir, a mountain in the east. In other words, this area that they talking about that the Hebrews inherited is in the Fertile Crescent. It is in the territories of Eden. They was put here in Saudi Arabia. So you have Africans. You have basically three brothers that was divided into the earth. We have Shem, which is still known as Africans. They was the first people to take back over the kingdom. And they, as you notice, they still in the Fertile Crescent. You have Hebrews that's in Saudi Arabia. They still within the borders of the Fertile Crescent or Eden. And but now we're going to go ahead and jump to Japheth. So if you go to Genesis 10, verses 1 through 5, we're talking about Japheth, and say, now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. And the sons of Japheth is Gomer, This Gomer, if you ever heard of the um, Conan the Barbarians, they basically are descendants of Gomer. They are Sumerians. And Megog, these are Scythians, and Medes and Javan, these are Grecians, and Tubala, these are Russians, and Meshach, these are Russians also, and Tyrus, I did a study on Tyrus. The study that I did on Tyrus, you have to go back to, I believe it's the mark of the beast and exposing the beast, finally exposing the beast and its mark. If you want to know exactly who Tyrus is, um, but we'll keep going. And the sons of Gomer, um, these are Germans. These are Turks. But in other words, I'm pretty sure you're picking up this pattern as you figure out that the descendants of Japheth are Caucasians. And when you get to verse 5, it say, by these were the islands beyond this talking about beyond the Mediterranean Sea. What is beyond the Mediterranean Sea? If you go back to this picture, this is Africa, this is the Mediterranean Sea. I did a study called the Narrow Gate, the Strait of Gibraltar. Basically, from the Strait of Gibraltar all the way to Israel is the Mediterranean Sea. So we say by these were the islands beyond the Mediterranean Sea of the Gentiles. These are Caucasians, and it is talking about in Europe. So Japheth are Caucasians that are in Europe beyond the Mediterranean Sea. They're divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after his family, in these nations. Now, one of the things I want to point out really quick, if you notice, 3 brothers, 2 of the brothers go back to the Fertile Crescent, Eden. Japheth is the only descendants after the flood that does not go back to the Fertile Crescent. Their language has changed. Japheth live off from building the tower, and they go where? To Europe, beyond the Mediterranean Sea. They are not in the Fertile Crescent after the flood, not in Eden. Why? Because God says he's going to put enmity between Satan's seed and his seed. Unfortunately, and the true reality of the matter is that the Caucasian people, descendants of Japheth that are from Europe, they went to Europe. One of the reasons why God divided them is because their DNA, their chromosomes were mutated. They were not healthy individuals anymore, and they was not only plagued with sickness and disease, but many of them, when you read about it, they was possessed with parasites. And these parasites, and now today we know, they are demons that are inside of people to modify their genetics and mutate the gene. This is why God said, I will put enmity between your seed, your children, and the woman children. And this is why white people, after the flood, or they wasn't white people yet, they probably didn't turn white until years later, but was in Europe and did not come back to the Fertile Crescent because they were the children of Satan. And their genetics was modified by parasitic diseases. This is why God separated them. This is why they did not come back to the Fertile Crescent after the flood, or Eden. Again, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed, in other words, Satan's offspring, the genetically mutations caused by parasitic diseases, and you go put enmity between Satan's seed and Israel, because Israel offspring, those that are not genetically mutated. So one of the things I want to mention, and it is to help make sense of the scriptures now, that when you're reading the Old Testament, when you get into the Torah, all of these laws that God keep trying to give the children of Israel, when you read about them now, you realize that he is trying to stop them from becoming sick and disease and their genes being mutated. Go over all the laws, what you shall eat, what you can't eat. When a person is sick, take them out of the camp. It was all to try to keep Israel from becoming sick, plagued, diseased, because they was the seed of God. They came out of Shem. And now the whole Old Testament kind of makes a whole lot of sense now. One of the verses I want to go to, just to prove a point. If you go to Job verses 2 and 1, it says, again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and Satan came also among them to present himself before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. People try to use this verse to go, nope, see, fallen angels are the sons of God. No, the sons of God came, and one of the sons of God that came to present gifts was possessed by Satan. He had the parasitic disease. He had the parasites. He had the sickness and the disease. That's what it means when they say they came along to present gifts also. See, now the entire Old Testament begins to make sense. The fruit, sickness and disease, parasites come from Satan. That's why in the beginning, when God kept creating everything, he said, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. When did he create parasites? Parasites are not good. When he told Satan, on thy belly shalt thou go, and flesh shall you eat all the days of thy life. So we got sickness and disease and parasites. Parasites, and they come, where the parasites come from, they are not of this planet. They come from another galaxy. But they are cursed. Go to John chapter 8, verses 42 to 48. This is the children of the devil. Yahushua said unto them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I proceed forth and come from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech, even because ye cannot hear my word? Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speak a lie, he speak of his own, for he is a liar, and the father of it. And because I tell you the truth, you believe me not. Which of you convince me of sin? And if I say the truth, why do ye not believe me? He that is of God hear God's words. You therefore hear them not, because you are not of God. Then answers the Jews. These was Israelites he was talking to, because what happened? That they ended up with the disease. They ended up with the parasites. They ended up with the mutations, possessed by the devil. When you go to Romans chapter 9, verses 6 to 7, it say, not as though the word of God hath taken none effect. For they are not all Israel, which are Israel. Neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they all children. But in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Again, he was trying to stop the children of Israel from becoming infected. But it did not work because the children of Israel did not obey God. Only a very small portion of them. If you go to Romans chapter 10, verses 11 through 13, it says, for the scripture said, whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. For there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek. There's no difference between black or white. There's no difference anymore between the seed of God and the seed of Satan, the children of God. For the same Lord over all is rich unto all that call upon him. For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And this concludes this message.